Well, thanks for a great talk, Jeff and Josh. Appreciate it. I thought we could maybe just do a little fireside chat, a few questions, and then we'll open it up. The first thing I want to do is obviously your book has lean in it, and lean startup has been around for a while. So I'm wondering, you've been there since the beginning of lean startup. How have you seen it evolve over time? Like, what are your thoughts on how you've seen lean startup evolve over time?
Josh?
He volunteered you.
Well, thank you. What's interesting is that I think there are parts of lean startup that have gone really far. So you hear people talk about hypotheses all the time, but unfortunately, I think that some of it has gone far in a kind of a watered down way, right? So people talk about hypotheses, but they don't apply that discipline of like, well, if you have a hypothesis, then you need to test it, right? That's the point of hypotheses. So over the last 10 years, I saw this kind of amazing excitement build around a lean startup, and I've seen lots of people sort of integrate that approach. Some companies have actually kind of adopted it in maybe perhaps more official ways, with growth boards and things like that. But I've also seen it kind of, some of that buzz maybe has dissipated from it. To me, what's happened in some ways is now that the buzz cycle has quieted down a little bit, it's just another super valuable part of the tool set. So for me, what I see is, experienced practitioners in design, product, and innovation, sort of using those tools, not necessarily under the sort of lean startup brand, but sort of as part of their toolkit.
Got it. Yeah.
Yeah. I'd argue, I would agree with Josh in the sense that I think the best and occasionally most frustrating thing that lean startup has given us, at least today, is shared language, right? So every any company in the world knows the phrase MVP, right? Mm-hmm. They know pivots, they know, like Josh said, hypotheses and experiments and things like that. The problem is that there are varying definitions, both between companies and within companies, about what those things mean. And so I think that there's a massive adoption of the language, which is great, and a less consistent and less successful adoption of the practices, and at times even a backlash. I've actually seen folks just kind of fed up with MVP and really actively pushing back and saying, I don't want to build the smallest thing, I want to build the whole thing, and it's an interesting pendulum swing that we're seeing.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, Jeff. That sort of eluded me. I that phrase MVP. Jeff and I stopped using it. We still talk about it in the book, but in our training and in our work with clients, personally, I almost always use the word experiment. And I just never use the word MVP, not because I don't agree with the sort of lean startup concept. I love the lean startup concept of MVP. What I have trouble with is when I say MVP, everybody imagines a different thing, right? Yeah. And so just rather than try and have a conversation about, well, what is it that Josh means when he says MVP, right? Just right. Let's just not have that conversation. Let's just call it an experiment and move forward.
Yeah, I think you raised some good points. I think it's almost funny. The easiest thing to adopt is the terminology. You don't have to actually really know it. You can just pair it like MVP and pivot and things like that. And it's funny. Pivot, I feel like got in the mainstream. Like, my friends of mine would be like, yeah, we pivoted our plans for the weekend. It's just like it's become a verb for when you change things. So that's a positive one. And then back on MVP. That has got to be the most hotly debated, contested term in one of the top ones in the product world, right? People will have fights over what is and isn't an MVP. So I totally hear what you're saying. And it has led some people to say, instead of trying to get alignment on the definition, I'm just going to not use that term. So yeah, I totally hear you. Awesome. Cool. And how about the other part, the UX part of it? How have you seen the field of user experience evolve, since when you first wrote the book?
Look, I think there's been tremendous steps forward. I mean, think about the first edition. So started writing it 10 years ago, right? So it's been a decade since we started writing the first edition. Tremendous growth in the profession, tremendous growth in the understanding of the value, tremendous growth simply in the head count. Sort of, I think like the global UX headcount has grown exponentially in the last decade, which is a signal that says organizations get that this is necessary. They're investing in it, and it's important to those companies. And so I think from that aspect, there's been tremendous positive growth. I think the fact that there is a third edition of this book also signals that some of the challenges that we set out to solve a decade ago still exist as well, which is, again, it's the integration of design successfully and seamlessly into a modern software development process. And again, this is where there's still people who will say, look, just give me my design phase back. I really miss the design phase where I just have a week or 3 weeks or a month or whatever it is to just work on this thing, and then I'll give it to you. And still there's a lack of understanding in both directions, not just from sort of the rest of the organization integrating design, but from design trying to integrate of how, like, what an ideal modern process needs to look like. And to me, that's a little frustrating given how much material has been created in the last decade to try to address this particular issue.
Yeah. And I would echo that. I mean, when I talk to our colleagues, it's not like best practices haven't been shared out there. And so when I've wondered why that's the case, I think the biggest thing is just tech is growing so fast. You have so many new people entering the field, like right out of college or right out of, whatever school they're doing, that haven't read all those books or haven't done all those classes or anything. So it's interesting. And I think what happens, I was talking with one person, like the best product teams continue to extend their lead by adopting the latest tools and techniques, but the average doesn't really move too much because you've got like new entrants coming in. So I don't know. It is interesting to see the variance in practices across teams. And I love that your book addresses that. I know a lot of teams, the whole integration of UX with Agile, that's one of the top challenges that product teams have. They're like, okay, cool, we're doing this Agile thing. Most teams have gone through the Agile transformation at this point, and they've got the separate design team. And it's like that picture that you show up there, Josh. So, and the top thing I hear is like, they want to try to do it, but they've got this 2-week sprint. And so the designers are like, how the heck can I do the mock-ups or prototypes? And I just can't do it in a 2-week sprint. So I'm just wondering, what advice you have for teams that find themselves in that kind of a situation.
Yeah. I think that that's sort of that comes down to that backlog management problem, right? And I think the one of the challenges in Agile is that it has all these rules that people have made up about what it means to be done in a sprint, right? There's this idea that if it can't be done in a 2-week interval, it's not valid, right? So you got to get it done in 2 weeks. And that's sort of legacy thinking from sort of back when teams weren't good at shipping, right? And so that kind of 2-week rule, like you have to have shippable software, is just a rule to make it so we get good at shipping, right? But it can be taken too far, right? And so I think what a mature team will do is they will look at this work and they will say, all right, some of this design work, let's look at this story, right? This story can easily be done collaboratively within the context of a 2-week sprint. Let's put it in the backlog. We'll do the design during the sprint, right? Let's look at this story. Oh, this story is complicated. This story is going to take more time. Like, let's address this work in Agile terms as kind of backlog grooming, right? Let's really develop our understanding of what the story is, but let's do it in a cross-functional way, right? This is not, we send the designers off into their traditional design process, right? And we won't talk to them until they come back with, you've heard this phrase, probably, the definition of ready, right? Which is like, we won't talk to designers until they show us artifacts that meet this checklist of ready. Like, come on, right? We're a team here. We need to have conversations, right? So that whether the design happens, like, quote, technically in the sprint or before the sprint, it needs to be happening collaboratively, right? And so the more interesting conversation is, what does that collaboration look like? And as a team, can we get away from a sort of a velocity-driven approach where developers and designers and product people are given the time to have conversations that are not hands on the keyboard making the ones and zeros, you know? And so there's a lot that goes into it, but I think one of the biggest challenges, like the way I think about it, is how do we collaborate effectively, not how do we get done in 2 weeks.
Yeah, no, I think you brought up a couple points. One is just, I've found if it can't get done in 2 weeks, teams will just not even put it in their backlog, or they'll never accept it into the sprint backlog, right? And so, and as we know, breaking down big things into pieces is a hard thing for teams to do sometimes, especially when you don't fully understand what it is. So it'll just never get done. And then the second thing you said is that, unfortunately, everyone's focused on their points. And so they don't want to take, if they're not going to deliver this in 2 weeks, I don't want to take that on my backlog, because I'm going to, like, my velocity, like you said, is going to take a hit. So it's almost like that backlog that you drew, that where you've got like discovery tickets versus delivery tickets, and you've got to be okay with discovery tickets, right? Where I guess.
Yeah, because, like, if you really think about it, like, what's the goal of a team, right? Is the goal of a team to stamp out as much software as possible in a given amount of time? Or is the goal of the team to stamp out something valuable, right? Mm-hmm. And if the team is aligned around making something valuable, then velocity is a absolutely useless measure, right? And so, I know that there are a lot of tech managers who I respect who like velocity and who use it to measure their team's performance. But I think it's a really false idol.
I mean, it promotes production, right? I mean, it rewards production, and the reality is that the production of code does not guarantee value, right? The production of code only guarantees two things: more code and technical debt. That's it, right? Those are the only guarantees, right? Value maybe, but it's not guaranteed. So we don't want to, there's no reason to promote, to reward production.
I think those are excellent points. And I think one of your Josh, your other book is like outcomes over outputs, right? It's like that whole kind of thing. And I think that oftentimes, because teams don't know how to estimate the value, they fall back on velocity as a proxy metric, or I would call it a vanity metric. It's like, okay, that's all we can measure. We don't really know what's going on with customer value. So let's just do this. And then you get those kind of spirals. Yeah.
Yeah. Just to kind of pick up on that, the canvas, those two boxes about the future state, the canvas is all about outcomes, right? What's the value we're providing to the business? What's the value we're providing to the user? And sort of in teaching this material, it's one of the big changes I think in the book is that we've spent a lot of time thinking about outcomes, so much so that I was even able to write a book about it, as you mentioned, and our understanding and the explanation in the book about outcomes, I think, is better than it's ever been. So
great, cool. One thing that often comes up in our world is, okay, that is all great if you work at a B2C company, but I work at B2B. So, we gotta, can we talk about, differences when teams try to apply that you've seen, like practical differences or challenges when B2B teams try to apply this compared to B2C?
But I love this idea.
I know
that somehow like a B2B company is not made up of humans.
There's
right?
no customers. There's no revenue.
Right.
Right?
There's no people over there. You're selling to a factory, like that, like you're selling to the icon of a company, like the emoji of a factory, right? It's ridiculous, right? And yes, look, your learning cycles might be longer. The number of customers that you have might be significantly smaller, right? But you're still selling to people. You're still solving problems for people. You're still enabling some kind of activity for people. And so the same conversations that you would have in a B2C setting, you're going to have in a B2B setting. Now, they might be more difficult to get. There might be multiple hops that you have to make in the value chain, right? So it might be a B to B to C kind of conversation where they sell your product to somebody else. Or something along those lines, and so you have to do a bit of extra effort to find all the people in the customer journey there. But everything is still the same. There's a business problem you're trying to solve. There are target audiences that you're trying to serve. There are behavior changes that you're trying to elicit to influence in those target audiences, and you've got hypotheses about how to do that. Now, yeah, you're going to have to get more creative about how to get access to those folks. How to, if you only have 200 customers, right? How frequently can you touch each customer? How frequently can you experiment on each customer, right? Those are fair concerns that you need to mitigate those risks. And there are lots of ways to mitigate those risks. You have beta programs, for example, where people opt in for you to be able to kind of test ideas with them. I worked in an organization that had I forget the form. It was like a review board or something along those lines. Some kind of basically a set of customers who, in exchange for some major discount on the service, each quarter would give us access to their people and give us feedback on new products, and we would switch out the membership on that board quarterly or semi-annually or something along those lines. But you're always selling to humans, whether it's B2C or B2B. And so don't forget that, and just try to find the humans that you're dealing with and understand the problems you're solving for them.
Yeah, no, I always laugh and smile too, because there's more similarities than differences. I finally came around to one big difference. I think everything you covered is just the presence of sales and the impact of sales. And does sales really know what's going to create customer value? Or are they just kind of chasing shiny objects, and you've got how loud is their voice versus the product team's voice trying to really understand what's going to drive, customer value?
Yeah. Your guest last month, Rich Marinoff, has a wonderful article about talking about the difference between product-driven organizations and sales-driven organizations. So that's great. If folks haven't read that article, I think it's really great.
Cool. All right, cool. Are there any kind of, since this is the third edition, new tools that help product teams do these kind of things have been coming up? It's very exciting. Are there any new tools or tools that you've seen team use successfully trying to do Lean UX applications that you would want to mention to folks?
So I think one of the struggles that folks have when they're trying to measure outcomes is this idea is just being able to get the data, right? Mm-hmm. And how do we know what our customers are doing with our product? And so I think that there's some interesting stuff happening in that space. I'm going to mention one product, but I'll be transparent and say that Jeff and I are advisors for a company called Impact Product. And they are trying to solve that problem by they've got an analytics tool that you can install on your site with kind of a single line of code, and then you're not beholden to the gatekeepers to get numbers, right? You can design, and product teams can kind of get the numbers of what their customers are doing. So I think that's a really interesting category of product, and I'm excited to see that develop. I don't know, Jeff, any other thoughts?
There's nothing that you haven't heard of that comes to mind immediately. I think folks are using whatever tools they have on hand to create their prototypes and their experiments. Nothing comes to mind that's uniquely different.
Got it. Yeah, I've seen kind of a growth in easier to prototype, like make clickable or tappable prototypes. Before we had like Balsamic and InVision, and now, I mean, they've been around for a little while now, but you see the best product teams using like Figma and Adobe XD and those kind of things. And then the other exciting area is, can you reach users? How can you get a hold of users? And you just see a lot of online panel sites, like usertesting.com has been around for a while. Validately, they got acquired by UserZoom, and userinterviews.com. It's one that I like. Anyway, it's easier to find people online. It's easier to build prototypes. So it's kind of exciting, I think, these days. And there's always new tools coming up. Cool. All right. Why don't we close out with, if there's any, I know people do love case studies. Thanks for sharing those 2 case studies. I don't know if there's any other examples, of recent examples or, good examples of like Lean UX in action that you could share with the team or share with the group.
So there's one case study. One of the companies that I was lucky enough to work with, and they were generous enough to share a case study in the book, is King Software. King is the maker of their casual gaming company. They make Candy Crush, and I'm thankful for them for my addiction to Candy Crush. I'm like 10 years too late to the party, but I can't stop playing the stupid game. It's so great. And I was lucky enough to work with them last year and for a while in a variety of different projects. And they do this. They practice this actively in many different ways. The case study in the book focuses on how they map their outcomes to impact metrics. If you think about sort of the high level measures of the health of their business, what are all the various things that players do that help them achieve those business goals? And it's a pretty hairy diagram. I mean, it's really messy, and it's worth seeing that in live as well. But other things they do is they will absolutely run things like 404 tests. So buttons to nowhere in certain versions of the game. They will do email tests, so sort of landing page tests using emails. So they'll send emails to a subset of customers and see if they click through. When they click through, there might be a questionnaire for them, and then they follow up with those folks. And so it's really impressive to see a company, and game studios don't often. I mean, you don't hear them talk about this very often, right? And so it was really encouraging and inspiring to work with that team and hear that they are giving this stuff a shot.
Cool. That's great. Yeah, I feel like e-commerce in general, like doing A/B testing experimentation is an exciting place to be, because you can test something and then like within a few days be like, great, we just grew revenue by 10% or something. That's very amenable to experimentation. All right, cool. All right, great. Well, thanks so much for a great fireside chat. With that, let's open it up to Q&A. I think we are ready for Amanda Sweeney. Amanda, if you're there you are. All right.
Hey guys.
Hey.
Thank you so much, by the way. I both have a startup on the side and work at a large financial institution right now. And so the nature of my question is influenced by 2 very different sides of my work, which is that are there certain nuances about Lean UX that should be either modified or changed or augmented if you are running more of a startup and small business where it's very easy to adopt the new and different and make quick pivots, compared to a large enterprise, multiple thousands of people company to ultimately adopt Lean UX, but knowing that getting and securing buy-in and things like that, or corporate red tape is a reality as well?
I mean, look, there in a startup like this should be your default way of working. Like I wouldn't even call it Lean UX. I'd be like, this is how we work, right? We come up with hypotheses and we learn quickly, because if we make too many wrong decisions in a row, we're done, right? There's no, and so typically there aren't going to be that many obstacles in a smaller startup situation for you to get what you need to do. Like you need to talk to a customer, go talk to a customer. You need to run an experiment. I think one of the biggest challenges in larger organizations is planning the process. But so in a startup, you could run through the whole process, potentially, with a very, very small group of folks very, very quickly, right? In a larger organization, you're going to need to involve a team of folks, and then somebody is going to have to start to clear hurdles in advance so that you can get access to customers, so that you can, get the budget to pay them for their time for a customer interview, get legal to sign off on the questionnaire that you might ask them, things like that, right? So those, I think, are the biggest challenges. Is your cycle time is going to be potentially a lot longer, and there's going to have to be sort of an advanced team of folks or people clearing the obstacles ahead of the team so that they can do this process as smoothly as possible.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I would say maybe the only other thing I would look out for is that, kind of everything in Lean UX is designed so that teams can make better decisions using evidence. And so one of the things that happens that kind of undermines Lean UX is when teams make decisions, they don't care about evidence-based decisions, right? And there are a lot of reasons to not care about evidence-based decisions, like my investor doesn't care and wants me to do X. Well, my investor has written a check and wants me to do X, and so what am I going to do, right? In large organizations, the reasons not to use evidence, there's just many more of them, right? There's many more decision makers, and I would say greater likelihood that they're going to be people who are not motivated to make decisions based on evidence. So I think the real thing, we had a colleague, Jeff and I had a terrific colleague years ago named John O'Mallenick, and John always used to say, look, it's not an experiment if you're not willing to throw away the work, right? So why run an experiment if you're not going to change your mind on it? And I think that's a consideration that I think is maybe more prevalent in big organizations than in small ones.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, Amanda, thanks for your question. Next up, John, I think you want to do your question?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, hop in there.
Hey, Jeff and Josh. Thanks so much for the presentation. I love, in particular, your hypothesis prioritization canvas. Since testing can be a crutch for PMs, I can understand why, since it can be difficult to make the decision of just shipping and measuring. So my questions to you are, how do you define significant risks? What are some examples? And my next question is, if there is a strong belief about delivering customer and business value and significant risk, is testing the wrong move?
So we'll start with the first question. So the way that we determine risk is in the same way that we determine a lot of the ideas in the Lean UX Canvas, is we talk to the team and we start to kind of get the team's assumptions out there. What do we believe is risky about this, right? So what are the ways that this could go wrong? And so, hey, it's going to be really difficult to build. Integrating modern technology with our antiquated backend system is going to be really complicated. Somehow making this work with our current customer journey, our user flow, is going to be really difficult. Like, what is that going to look like? What is that going to work like? Can we actually build in the business logic to make it successful, right? So you get what I'm saying, like teams are going to start to kind of break down the challenges that make this a potentially risky idea. Now, to get a thorough list of potential risks, you need to have a cross-functional representation in that conversation. And then to determine which risks you're going to test first, you need to identify what you believe to be the riskiest one of those right now. And as I said before, really, it really depends on the life cycle of the product that you're developing. So if you're in the early stages of a product, the risks that you want to test first are going to be risks to the value of the idea, right? Is the idea valuable, right? Are you solving a real problem? Are people looking for a solution? If they find it, will they click on it? Will they sign up for it? Will they try to use it? Will they come back and use it again, right? Those are the kinds of risks that you want to test first. right? Risks around feasibility, scalability, performance, security, and usability are irrelevant if there's no value in the idea, right? Because you're not going to, assuming you get good data, you're not going to build it, you're not going to scale it. Security won't matter, performance won't matter, that type of thing. It doesn't matter if people can use an idea that nobody wants, right? Like that's the thing. And so that comes from conversations, and then really kind of determined based on the life cycle of where you are in the life cycle. Now, look, if you've proven value, right? People are looking for this. It's a real problem. They're clicking on it. They're signing up for the waiting list. They're going to try it. Terrific. All right. Now, how do we scale this? How do we make it usable? How do we polish the design? How do we make this secure and high performance and that type of thing? Those are the next risks downstream. So that would be my answer to that. Josh, anything to add to that?
No, John, did we get the second part of your question?
No, we didn't. We didn't get to it yet.
Okay.
What was the second part of your question?
That was my question.
Yeah. So I read closely your hypothesis prioritization canvas, and specifically looked at the wording in the ship and measure section. And in it, I noticed that you had emphasized delivering customer and business value, but made no mention of significant risks that was called out in the testing box. So I was just wondering if there's an idea, if there's strong belief around an idea about delivering customer and business value, but there's also significant risks, I would imagine you would feel that it would still be appropriate to test the idea rather than shipping.
The idea would live in a different box, right? And so if you've done your value testing and you have a strong hypothesis that it's valuable, right? Then it lives in a things, you move things into different boxes depending on whether you understand the value or not, right? And so to Jeff's point, that first question is usually about, do we believe it's valuable, or do we have a different points of view about whether this is valuable or not? That is a risk. Is it valuable? Yeah. That's the number one risk. Right? Yeah. And now then once you've proven that it's valuable, right? Then you can move on to your next set of risks. So you kind of, you sort of iterate through any given idea, and you may do multiple tests on an idea first to assess, because one of the challenges, I think, when we start to adopt this sort of scientific method inspired approach, right, is that we often write these hypotheses. Oh, we're going to test this idea. I have an idea for whatever it is, and let's go test this idea. Actually testing our ideas is hard and requires a lot of work, and often requires multiple tests in a row to test different parts of the idea. So we might test initially to see if it's valuable. Then we might have to do another test to see how valuable it is. How much would people pay for it? How often would they use it? Right? In what circumstances would they use it? Then we have to do these tests about, did we get the implementation right? And so you're often working in an iterative way, and an idea can move to different places on that prioritization canvas, depending on kind of where the idea is in the life cycle.
Super helpful.
Okay,
thanks.
Great. Yeah.
Awesome, John. Thanks. All right. Hey, Meng, if you're there, go ahead and, hi, welcome. You want to go ahead and ask your question?
Yes, thanks so much. This has been a wonderful discussion, and I hope this doesn't drive you crazy, but I work at a large company, just as context, and my manager is very open to trying out this as a product development process. But what would be really helpful in this large organization is to be able to give some time frames. So in my comments, I was saying, like, so for instance, we have run 3-day design sprints and get great stuff out of it. I don't think we actually get any customer testing in that, because we need to then go set that up. But if you're going to give me like a rule of thumb, like hey, no guarantee, but typically we see that like we probably have to go through filling out the canvas, go through like 3 cycles of iterating to kind of land where we need to. And that usually takes like 2 weeks to go through. So if we like set aside the whole like logistics part of getting customers, but just the like Scrum team time, what would you recommend?
Look, so I think it really depends on the complexity of the issue that you're taking on and the scope of it. So I think the general, in my experience, a mature team that's familiar with the process can get through an entire cycle, it can get through an entire canvas, and to your point, not through executing of the experiment, but get through box A where they've designed their experiment in as fast as a half day. Like a mature team on a relatively low scope idea, right? Not like a big reinvention of the business or anything. And then I've seen situations where the challenge was fairly complex. Hey, let's reinvent this business unit, or let's take on a significant overhaul of the product. And teams have spent up to 5 days really getting through. But that will typically include at least 1, if not 2, customer validation cycles in there. So at least 1 sort of run through with its customer conversations. But so up to 5 days, I think, is the longest I've ever spent on a first pass of the canvas. Yeah.
Yeah. Was that what you were asking about how long it takes to get through a canvas? Or
exactly. And so maybe I'm, again, the words matter. So I'm assuming part of that then, Jeff, you're talking about there's validation. So there's some like low fidelity prototypes created. You can show it to some customers and they're either like, oh my God, I love like this piece of it, but like, I don't care about that. And then you iterate again. And so are you referencing that whole cycle, Jeff, the 5 days?
It's basically like the whole canvas, but at this point, I think you're probably, you're executing an experiment at least once, potentially twice, so that by the end of the 5 days, where you truly end up is you end up with a hypothesis backlog that's actually prioritized based on some evidence. Whereas if you were to not run the experiment, you could end up with a hypothesis backlog that's based on assumptions, right? Prioritized based on assumptions.
Got it. And then, so then with the hypothesis backlog, then there takes more, like then you work through each hypothesis to then
so ideally, right? Ideally, between boxes 6 and 7, you've identified the first thing you're going to test, and then the scope of that experiment is going to be the least amount of effort that you need to put forward to learn the thing you're trying to learn. And so it's impossible for me to say it's a week or it's a day or it's an hour. So here's a good exercise. When we teach this stuff, we challenge our teams with a decreasing amount of time, right? So so the first question is, what's the most important thing you need to learn? Okay, so they answer that question. They do that exercise that I just talked to John about a second ago, right? And they say, okay, great. Now, if you had a month, what would you do, right? How would you test that? And what do you think you'd learn? And the teams come up with some kind of an idea. Great. Now, what if you had a week? Right? What would you do? And then we go, okay, what if we gave you the rest of the day today? What could you do? And that decreasing amount of that increased constraint of less and less time forces the teams to really get creative about learning something, right? So I think that, look, if you're pressed for time or if the organization is only willing to give you a finite amount of time, use that constraint to drive the creativity into learning the most that you can in that time. And there are always things that you can do in that short amount of time.
Got it. Okay, that's great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, thanks for your question. All right, next up we have Theodore. Theodore, if you're there, you want to unmute, and there you go.
Hey.
Get you in here.
Guys, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yep.
So hi. First of all, so I'm from Germany. Hi. First of all, thank you for really your amazing work, and also to Dan Olsen. And this is really eye-opening. Even if I'm here in the startup world in Germany, I have the impression we're so far away from you. So it's of course 11 hours, so we're pretty at the other side of the world, but this is really interesting. In particular, so we're having here a great automotive community, and we have a lot of lean works. We have really large lean operations community, but I have the impression that those two communities are not connected. And we're doing a lot of kata stuff and like this iterative learning in operations, but we don't do this in product development and in our startup world. So there's a lot of things to do, and it might make sense to connect those communities even more. Or I don't know if it's connected in your part of the world, but in ours, it's not that much. That's maybe the first question.
Yeah. My experience is that those two communities are that the lean startup community and the lean UX community is inspired by the lean manufacturing stuff. But I don't see a lot of cross pollination between those two worlds, So I think that's too bad. I think there's some crossover, but not a lot.
Absolutely. And there would be much more because the logic is the same, like very fast, rapid, iterative learning and getting like your hypothesis validated. My question would be like the following: if you would found a startup and we have a lot of money constraints, so the question is, what are the first people you would hire or freelancers you would hire? So what would be the order? So would you start with like a designer, then a product manager, and in the end a developer, so that we don't start coding too early? Maybe you have some thoughts on that.
I would hire Josh Seiden.
I was going to answer the same way.
On an hourly basis, right? So.
That's it.
Because I heard you can run experiments with an hour, so that might work.
Here's actually what I think. What I think is that teams. You want to have a small cross-functional product trio, right? Like that's kind of what you need. And it's not that you need 3 humans, it's that you need design, product management, and software, right? Technology. You need those 3 capabilities. Sometimes you get that in one body, and then you can add a second person and a third person. And so what I think about a lot, and it's one of the reasons that Jeff and I have been working together for so long, is that you want to find people who complement your skill sets. Right. And so Jeff and I are very aligned, sort of philosophically. He approaches the work in kind of one way, and I approach the work in another way. And those 2 ways are very complementary and very helpful to each other. And so I think what you want is you want to find both complementary skill sets, right? Like how do I complete that trio, right? And depending on what capabilities you bring, and then can I find people who are both aligned but also complementary in terms of skills, right? And that's a tricky thing because oftentimes we find people who bring different skills from us, but we also don't get along with them, right?
Absolutely.
Right. So how do I find people who are alike enough, but also different enough? So that's my answer is that build that 3-legged stool based on, kind of what capabilities, but you definitely want, if you're in a startup, you need to find people who are action oriented and hands-on and who are willing to go out on the Hauptstrasse and grab a customer by the arm and say, hey, can I get your opinion of this? Right. Like, abstract theoretics don't work well in a startup world.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right. Thanks, Theodore. Next up, we have Anne Muller here. Anne, if you're there, you want to unmute? And there we go.
Yeah. Hi.
Hello.
Thank you for all 3 of you for hosting and participating in this. I always get a lot out of Dan's talks. My question is, so for context, I'm working at a B2B SaaS company. And how would you recommend that we use this canvas as an ongoing, evolving map for a product? And thank you, John, for helping me reframe that question. So this is actually a bit of an augmentation to John's question. And also maybe to help with context a little bit, I could, from past experience, I could imagine this map or a similar map being used as a one and done tool. And then 6 months later, guess what? The product's actually still getting built and everybody's abandoned the map. So that's the pain point that I'm hoping to get your input on.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's interesting. So I do think that the tool can be useful used either way that you describe, right? Like it's a pretty useful kickoff tool. And if that's all you use it for, like, that's okay if it creates some understanding of the challenge ahead. But I'm currently working with a relatively large retail client, and sort of the model that we've got there is almost that the canvas, each box in the canvas represents a little bit of a backlog of almost a stack of assumptions to be tested, right? So who do we think the user is, right? Well, the persona could be persona A or B or C or D. We're not quite sure. So let's, it's almost like a backlog. Let's see if it's persona A, right? And so box 3, we put a Post-it note on box 3 with persona A. And then we do some validation and we see, is this the right person? And as our understanding sharpens, maybe that box becomes more stable, right? And similarly, as the solution evolves in box 5, each time we have more features or clarified understanding, we can update that box. So almost conceptually, I picture it like a stack of plates, in a cafeteria, and you sort of take the first plate off and you test it and you see, like, does this fit in this box? Oh yeah, it does. Let's kind of pin it here and move on to the next thing. So I think you can kind of use it as a visualization for sort of, this is the current hypothesis or set of hypotheses or set of assumptions, and you can kind of continue to update your working theory.
Great, thanks.
All right, great. Thanks, Dan. Appreciate it. Okay, we have 3 questions left. Next up, we have Olga. Are you there, Olga?
Yes. Yes.
Cool. All right. Everyone. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you, Jeff and Josh. This has been an amazing talk. So the question that I have is, you mentioned that, you mentioned OKRs, and you mentioned that OKRs lead to lean UX and they lead to organizational agility. I work, for the context, I work for a B2B SaaS organization that is very roadmap driven and sales driven and not user outcome driven. And our teams do not use OKRs framework. Have you seen in the past or any organizations that are successfully utilizing lean UX while using other frameworks, not OKRs?
Yeah. So look, we were doing Lean UX before OKRs became popular. But to be fair, OKRs have been around 40 years. It's not something particularly new. It's just their popularity has grown significantly. And so I know that I have, and Josh has, attempted to implement Lean UX in organizations where there was a very strong waterfall process. There was a very strong sales team. There was a very strong founder CEO, right, who has a very strong opinion about how things should be done. I think the best thing that you can do in those situations is, first and foremost, try to leverage the people who do have access to customers, right? So, for example, if getting access to customers is tough and you've got a very sales-driven organization, see if you can empower or enable that sales organization to be a channel for you for inbound information about the market. Hey, what are you hearing on your sales calls? What are people asking for? Why are they asking for it? Can I go with you on a sales call? I promise I won't say anything, right? Like I'll be super quiet. I won't mess anything up. So are there opportunities for you to turn some of these people who may currently appear to be in an adversarial relationship to your product development aspirations into allies? I think that becomes one thing. The call center. Can you create a relationship with the call center or customer support or whoever that is, because they're talking to customers every day? What can you learn from them if you can't get access out of the building. I think that's number one. I think the second thing that you can do is as you're collecting evidence, wherever you're getting it from, whether it's through those sources, whether it's through analytics, whether it's through usability tests or guerrilla tests that you're doing sort of on your own, is to surface that evidence broadly as much as you can. Say, hey, listen, every time we talk to customers, they keep saying that they don't want X, and we keep making more X in the product, right? Maybe we should think about that. And I think that there's an opportunity to sort of keep surfacing that evidence in the hopes that it will drive some kind of behavior change in the organization. It may not, and look, and I do believe that there is a little bit of risk in that particular tactic as well, because maybe somebody has a strong agenda, like a political agenda that says, look, I'm going to get this thing built no matter what. And, you keep saying that people don't want it, but I'm going to get this thing built. And so I think it is worthwhile to watch out for that. Other ways we've done it in the past, you said, is it a big company that you work for? No. Okay. So my idea is not going to work. But in a big company, you can try to sneak under the radar. Like you can try to just kind of do guerrilla lean UX, right? So you find like-minded colleagues in engineering and in product management and in design, and you say, look, for this next initiative, let's just do this, right? And then if the outcome, if the result is good, people are going to ask, hey, how did you do that so quickly and so successfully? Well, let me tell you, we actually tried this other thing, and here's why it's different than what we're currently doing. So that's another tactic. But if you're in a small company, it's tough to sneak around like that, I think. I don't know, Josh, what about you? What have you done in the past?
I mean, here's the thing for me is that what's Lean UX good for, right? Lean UX is a really good method when you're trying to figure out what to build and you don't know, right? When there's a high amount of uncertainty. And so what that, to me, the other way to say that is Lean UX is good for figuring out and answering questions around project risk, right? So we are committed to doing X, even though, sales has sold X and we have to build X, right? Whatever that is, there's still risk there. How can we reduce the risk? And so you may not be able to change your commitment to building X, but you might be able to get it done better or in a less risky way. And so to me, Lean UX is a useful approach when talking with stakeholders to say, hey, these are the risky parts of this project. We'd like to work this way to help eliminate some of that risk. So for me, that's the starting point with stakeholders is where's the risk and how do we pay that down?
Thank you so much. Those are great suggestions.
Good. Thanks, Olga.
Olga, thanks for your question. Okay, second to last here we have Kim. Kim, head on up here.
Yeah. Hey, I'm Kim Neese. Thank you. Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Josh. Really appreciate this time. So I work for a large organization that we're B2C and we deal with like COVID testing, COVID vaccinations. So there's a lot of pivoting and there's a lot of experimentation going on right now. So my product team is super enthusiastic about OKRs. They've got like measuring things. And we've also got like all this stuff about our user and what our goals are in terms of helping people on their path to, great health and healthcare, but they're really separate. And so the OKRs that our team ends up with are things like, acquire 10% more users or, engage users so we can learn. And it's really hard because I have a very mission-driven team, like they really want to help people. So I'm trying to figure out ways to talk with product about how do we have that user story in with the OKR. So I love the Lean Canvas number 4, the user outcomes and benefits. I'm just curious, like how do teams, what are the different ways that you might come up with that or use it, or is there just one way?
Well, there's always a million ways. That's the problem, right? So look, the way I like to think about it is outcomes sort of have a point of view, right? So the user is trying to do something. And how do we understand what the user is trying to do? And how do we understand when the user is doing things, what are the things that the user does that brings value to the organization, right? So it's like a stack, right? It's two different points of view. I like to pick on Facebook for a second, right? I like to read about my friends, what my friends are doing, right? That's the benefit to me, right? The benefit to Facebook is when I see ads. I don't want to see ads, right? I don't want to see ads at all. And so the outcomes for the business is user sees and engages with ads. That's the business point of view, right? The outcome for the user is I see and engage with content from my friends. And so what you need to create is a kind of a logic that says, the user's trying to do this. We're going to enable the user to get this benefit from the system, right? We're going to enable them to do this valuable behavior. It's a behavior that they want to do. And when they do that behavior, one of the side benefits or an additional behavior is something that benefits the organization. And so that's that kind of that's why there's two boxes. That's why there's box 4, which is the user's point of view, and box 2, which is the business's point of view. And so you need to kind of serve all of those different points of view when you're making your plans. Does that make sense?
It does. I think is that coming from like we have a bunch of foundational research about what users are looking for, and then we have like ongoing research about just it's like, do people need a health card or they just need a vaccination record? Like, what do they need? So there's bigger picture outcomes, and then they're sort of changing in the moment. And I'm like, can we tie those bigger picture ones in the meantime to hold it, just to make it not just be acquire 10%, and then pull the smaller ones on as we go? Or is there, I don't know, just trying to make sense of it.
Yeah. So I I'm going to plug my other book here for a second. My other book is called, yeah, I know. So I've written it's a short book. It's called Outcomes Over Output. And it talks about this problem. It talks about this. There's sort of 3 levels. There's the high level organizational, what's the impact the organization is trying to deliver. Then below that high level impact, there are levels of finer grained levels of outcomes that we're trying to achieve. And so the book talks about a way to kind of think about that systemically and break that down into meaningful, smaller, meaningful units of work that a team can really do. So I would encourage you to look at that.
Great.
All right, great, Kim. Well, thanks for asking your question. Appreciate it. Cool. All right, so. Yeah, with that, guys, I just want to thank you all for having a great. You can see there's a lot of great questions, a lot of interest about all that. So super excited that they were able to do that and answer questions with those folks. So everybody, please join me in giving Jeff and Josh a round of applause. I appreciate it. It's hard to hear when everyone's muted, but I appreciate it.